if this company disappeared tomorrow, what would the world be losing? And like, if the answer is nothing, well then maybe you have some, deeper thinking to do.
You can achieve overnight success from a growth point of view if you have enough money and you're willing to spend it. But are you building something that is resilient? Are you building something that is durable?
Are we really just giving them a meal that's ready in 2 minutes, or are we giving them the magic of mealtime in a way that is much more frictionless? We went from aided brand awareness in Ontario about 1% to 11%. We want to fight against the idea of volume at this point and really go after quality, especially when it comes to storytelling.
Something that has been on my mind lately, and one of the reasons that I'm thrilled you're joining me here today, is that brands that are winning in subscription commerce, and I've been in subscription commerce for sort of 15 years, are the ones not just with the best product, although that matters, and we'll get into that, but it's the brands that have figured out how to create content that reminds people that they've made a good choice, not just on the first purchase, but on that 10th purchase. And increasingly those that are kind of leaning into an omni-channel world. So how do I tell a great story, show up where my customers are to keep my customers showing back up? I think that's genuinely hard. I think that is exceptionally hard in a category, say like meal kits or meal delivery, where it can be crowded, customers can be price sensitive, and it's built on this notion of habit over sort of novelty. So my guest today, Matthew Morein, has been living inside this tension at one of the most interesting food brands in Canada, WeCook. He also happens to be a Montrealer. He also happens to be in New York. We have an awful lot in common. So there's a lot to unpack. So welcome back to another episode of the Brilliant Commerce Podcast, where I get a chance to sit down. My favorite thing to do is to sit down in person with some of the brightest minds in commerce behind some of what I call iconic or next to be iconic brands. I think WeCook is definitely on the path to becoming iconic, certainly in Canada. So Matthew, thanks for getting on a plane this morning and being here with me in New York. Welcome to the pod.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
My first question is normally, where do I find you today? Because we get to do these over Zoom more often than not. I know where I'm finding you today. I'm finding you in New York, but where would we find you most of the time?
Most of the time, you'd probably find me working on wecookmeals.ca. And of course, working on all of the content and pieces that bring that brand world to life.
Yeah. And born and raised in Montreal?
Yep. Born and raised in Montreal. Quick stint in Ottawa when I was a teenager, and then rushed back to Montreal as quickly as I could when I was going to university.
Cool. I lived here in New York for about 6 years, and I grew up in Montreal as well. And I always thought of Montreal as sort of being New York's little cousin. There's an awful lot of similarities in terms of, it's a city on an island. It's a city with an amazing food culture.
Yep.
WeCook is only available today in Canada. How much of the Montreal story, where there is that strong food culture, sort of underpins some of where you guys are today?
Certainly when I joined, I think the brand expression was really convenience, 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 and that made sense for the time. Those were the USPs that were like constantly being kind of re-hammered into the customer, ready in 2 minutes, delivered straight to your door. And I think when looking at the broader marketplace and what our competition was doing and what were the brand expressions within our competitive set, everybody was kind of speaking the same language, and it was all really functional. And so in an effort to differentiate from the rest of the marketplace, we looked at, okay, how can we develop a more emotional connection to our brand? And the brand territory that we landed on was really rooted very much in Montreal, the joie de vivre.
Yeah.
Obviously, the food scene, which you mentioned. Our executive chef comes from the Joe Beef Group. He was the executive chef of the Joe Beef Group for 10 years. His name is Gabriel Drapeau. His team also, pedigree of some of Montreal's finest fine dining restaurants. And so I think that like joy of eating and the magic of mealtime was really something we wanted to bring into the brand expression of WeCook. So Montreal is a big part of it, I think.
Yeah, I love that. One of the reasons I was excited to talk to you, in preparation for this, I did a little bit of homework on your career. I wouldn't describe it as a direct path to get into meals. You've had a really interesting background. So what led you to WeCook?
I studied art and then quickly realized I didn't see a future as like a studio artist. And I had kind of dabbled in music while I was studying art in university. And, we're talking about like 2004, 2005, thereof MySpace. Started making music, ended up kind of forming a group with some other musicians in Montreal, putting on some parties. People would I'd come down here, we'd book people to play in Montreal, and then some of the music I was making started to travel further, and, one day I woke up to a MySpace message asking me if I wanted to come DJ in Hong Kong,
Wow.
and so I spent about 5 years globetrotting, making music and DJing, and eventually kind of realized I was better at the fun side of it than the business side of it. And if I wanted to kind of settle down, I might, look elsewhere. And my roommate that at the time had a clothing boutique in Montreal. He was like, "Why don't we start an ecom, component to this business?" He was buying clothing and accessories, a lot of jewelry in Asia. And I thought, well, I know how to work a camera. Like, how hard can it be?
Yeah.
And this is like 2008. Shopify
Yeah.
isn't popular yet. Everything has to be done.
Shopify wasn't an option yet.
No, it wasn't an option. Everything had to be built from scratch,
Yeah.
essentially. I didn't know anything about email marketing.
Yeah.
We had no customer database. I think we just kind of put it on our Facebook or whatever,
Yeah.
like, or, gave out a flyer at the store, when somebody walked in. At least he had that like brick and mortar footprint. But it was a slog. It
Yeah.
was really hard. We had our friends come in, take pictures of them wearing the clothes. They'd come in hungover as Montreal. Like it
Yeah.
was like, okay, this is really difficult. Started kind of focusing more on the jewelry, smaller items, easier to photograph, didn't need a person to necessarily like model rings and necklaces and such. But it was really hard. And after about 3 years, and luckily I was still DJing, so I had income otherwise because that
Yeah.
business made no money. I decided to get a job and joined a company called Le Chateau, which is like a
Sure.
very long standing at that point in time, kind of like the original fast fashion
Yeah.
retailer in some respects. They were like pioneers of going to Europe, seeing what was coming down the
Yeah.
runway and knocking it off. And there
Everyone had
was,
that Le Chateau black dress.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
it was like the spot.
Yeah.
Also, if you talk to like disco DJs and people, like that original store they had, store one on St. Catherine, which is now Coss, I believe, was like a hub.
Yeah.
Apparently, they would have people playing records, and like you'd hear the music that you were at the store during the day that you'd be later
Yeah.
hearing at like the disco club at night. And I kind of cut my teeth there first as a stylist, and then given that their business was really dominated on the women's side, it was like 6 or 7, 8% of it was menswear. They needed somebody who wanted to kind of champion menswear, and so I kind of transitioned from a stylist into working in marketing. And then I joined Psycho Bunny when it was kind of in the process of being acquired by the group in Montreal that eventually bought it and have grown it. And at that point in time, it was about 7 people in the back of a bigger office of what was Thread Collective that was doing a lot of licensed apparel, Pajar, Mark Echo, all of that stuff. And it was no ecom, no monobrand stores,
Yeah.
and we just started building, replatform on Shopify, started opening stores, following where the ecom traffic was. Obviously, the brand very endemic to Miami, South Florida, bright colors, the bunny. And I was there for about 6 years, led brand and marketing, opened 86 stores across the US and Canada, and learned a whole ton in the process.
Yeah. I mean, what a journey. I remember
Yeah.
those early days of I remember before he was in e-commerce, it was catalog commerce, and so we were launching
Oh yeah.
websites where we would be introducing that season's line to customers and trying to drive them into stores, and then as the e-commerce market became so nascent, I remember, yeah, it was a slog. Like just to get 20 products online sometimes would feel like 2 weeks. And at the same time, it felt exciting, not too dissimilar from today, where you sort of feel like you can do anything. It was hard, but kind of rewarding. Like we were learning it together. Customers were learning the behavior at the same time that we either as an agency or retailers were figuring out how to show up on sort of this new channel. And so you really saw that whole thing. And um, I'm curious when you made the transition from, or I mean, back then, like marketing and brand were like very closely knit and sort of put together. And then we went through this era where there was brand marketing and there was performance marketing. It was very specific to very different disciplines. It feels like today they're sort of coming back together. I'm just sort of like curious to get your point of view on how you've seen that evolve and like where you are excited to see it go at WeCook Meals. It sounds like you had to do an awful lot of brand work when you came in.
Yeah. I think at Psycho Bunny, a big portion or like of the heavy lifting of customer acquisition was done by opening stores.
Hmm.
So like you have a branded experience somebody can walk into. We're going into the like A malls all across the US and eventually Canada. We're trying to get, lease lines at the 50-yard mark was the internal terminology, high traffic. And so we would see a spike in web traffic even when we just put a hoarding up in a market saying like store coming
Yeah,
soon. And so that was kind of played a big role in terms of like acquisition, certainly for the stores, but also on e-com. But certainly as a brand guy at heart, like my focus was always more on the brand side. I'm less of a performance marketer in terms of my experience and knowledge. Obviously, we feed what ends up going on paid channels as well. But certainly at Psycho Bunny, what was in my mind a very brand-led organization, and we did a lot of exciting brand campaigns and initiatives over the years. To come to WeCook, which had really been like a performance only company, I think there was a realization at some point that like there's whether by a shift in what works and or to your point, in order to build something that's a little bit more resilient and that has the opportunity to open doors and new channels, which we're now exploring, I think it was important to kind of view the importance of like really having both. And I think, research shows evidently that like brand activity can increase performance marketing's
yeah,
effectiveness as well. But it was there was a lot to do. There was some internal kind of education around
sure.
this is what brand building is. And I think there was a sense initially a brand is kind of just what it looks like, on the box or the email. And I was like, we can build so much more than this.
Yeah,
And we can try to tell like what I said earlier, like a more emotional story. Like people need to connect more than just this is the meals that I get that, I can peel off the thing and it's ready in 2 minutes or I can eat it right away. Like, what are we providing? Yes, we're saying you don't have to cook, you don't have to clean, but like we're also delivering the magic of mealtime and giving you more of the ability to enjoy that
yeah,
by not having to necessarily do the prep. And the other thing is like our customers, it's not like they never cook. Like we just sent out a survey this morning. Over 30% of them cook basically every day. It's
yeah,
like it's not a customer base that is replacing all of their meals. It's a couple lunches here, a couple of dinners there. They don't have the time. We're there for them. And the rest of the time they do cook. So the idea that we're like completely solving all of their meals, I think also is not really the reality. And so how do we develop products that can potentially help even when they are cooking, right?
right.
So like sous vide proteins that are already in a sauce, ready to eat, and they just have to like add sides or what can they do with it? We have a General Tao chicken that's ready to eat. We made banh mi,
Yeah.
sandwiches with them the other day. You can obviously put it over rice, but like opening the door to kind of different creative expression through food and opportunities.
Yeah, I can't, and I imagine like that doesn't happen without brand. And I do think that more founders, more marketers, more operators they need to develop that internal courage to be able to invest in brand marketing. Like there's this feeling of like, oh, this brand is an overnight success. But when you start peeling back the layers, you realize like they've been at it for a little while. And I think that I have always seen those iconic brands, those ones that have invested in becoming a durable company, getting to know their customers, you do it through brand marketing. Like, yes, it's true you can achieve overnight success from a growth point of view if you have enough money and you're willing to spend it. But are you building something that is resilient? Are you building something that is durable? And as you talk about not necessarily category expansion, but you created a product that people start to use in a different way. Like maybe I'm using this sous vide protein as a part of a meal that I'm doing, and I reach for it and I'm going to share that content because I have a relationship with the brand. So I would be curious, what advice you would have for someone who is moving into a brand role for the first time and maybe needs to advocate to some of their leadership group that we're going to invest in something that is, let's acknowledge it, sometimes difficult to measure, but that the payoff 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road, that gives you permission to expand doors, to expand channels, to expand usage of the product, that's when you start to realize the benefits of that durability and the resilience. So yeah, I mean, big question, but I'd be curious, like, what advice you would have for someone who would, God, I got to go in there and I got to pound the table and
Yeah.
fight for this.
Yeah, so I've definitely been in the room where you're trying to advocate for a big brand spend and the question's like, "Okay, so how are we gonna measure if this is a
Hmm.
success?" You're like, "Well, we're not. You
Yes,
just need to
let's start
believe in the
there.
process." Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think also I think sometimes people get trapped in this idea that investing in brand means out of home, it means billboards, it means like a PR stunt or some like very expensive campaign. And I think the fundamentals of brand is just doing the work, trying to understand like what your unique value proposition is. Like
Yeah.
I really love that question. Like if this company disappeared tomorrow, what would the world be losing?
Yeah.
And like
Mm.
if the answer is nothing, well then maybe you have some,
Maybe
deeper
there's no
thinking to
brand.
do. Right. So like yeah, because there's a product, right? But then like what does the brand on top of that like deliver to you? We recently had an offsite and I asked the room, I was like, what, everybody in the room, what's a brand? What's a brand? And I always show and I use this a lot when we were going around Cycle Bunny stores trying to like educate store staff to be able to like deliver the brand experience and try to be excited about it. And I always show the swoosh and the siren, the
Mm.
Starbucks siren. And I say like, "Look, I show you this and, like, I don't need to explain it. You know exactly what it means. It means
Yeah.
anybody can be an athlete, or it means coffee can be, like, an affordable luxury that, like, everyone can participate in,
That's on every
or
corner.
consistency."
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what does this brand mean? And, like, what do you want people to, like, feel or, like, have in their heads as the, like, positioning or idea about this brand when they interact with it? And then understand that, like, every single thing we do is gonna have an impact on that. You wanna get in as high as you can because it's so easy for that impression to fall,
Yeah.
but it's so hard to, like, climb up back up that ladder of somebody's impression of you. So, it needn't always be a big, multi-million dollar brand campaign, which, like, if you can't afford, great, but it's also like, let's build the fundamentals, like, who are we? Who's our customer? How do we want them to see us? And then how do we kind of start to make incremental steps towards brand building. It's not something you can do overnight. And I've seen, that mistake, or the perception there be had, or something that you can do once and then be done with it. Oh, we did brand. We're done. Our brand
Yeah.
is finished. And, we're seeing it at WeCook now with having to kind of rework or re-question and revalidate the work that we did when I arrived that was really like direct to consumer focused and now say, okay, but what if we're going to retail? What if we're going to, go after businesses and like have meal delivery in office buildings? Because a lot of them don't necessarily have cafeterias. What about different types of retail and different, use cases? Is the brand that we built for D2C still make sense for all of these new channels? So I think also knowing that it's made out of clay, not out of cement,
Yeah.
and it needs to be something that
It's
you
a
keep
great way of looking at
keep evolving, keep working on, and it needn't necessarily be like these big swings. You need to fire bullets and make sure that they're, hitting before you start to fire cannonballs,
it. Yeah.
essentially.
I like the clay analogy. It's interesting because you're not going to fundamentally change it, but you can evolve it over time. Um,
And it needs to stretch.
yeah.
Your brand needs to stretch into the new places that you might need to take it or want to
Yeah.
take
And
it.
maybe your customers stretch you there, or maybe you sort of, on certain moments, you have to stretch your customers to be where you sort of want them to be. And
Yeah,
other times,
totally.
like if they're, I think about brand as a thing that you want to be friends with sometimes. Like a brand is
Mm.
really doing a great job if I'm proud to wear it, if I'm proud to introduce it to someone.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not hiding the fact that I bought this and I'm actually sort of saying, hey, I put this meal together and you know what helped me? WeCook. Like
Yeah.
that's a kind of a that's sort of a cool story. And I think as I again did my research leading up to this, I think you guys have done a great job telling stories. Um, as like any good Montrealer, I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan. I of course I noticed the partnership with PK Subban, and so there's the Joe Beef. That story extends well beyond Montreal. That's like one of Canada's best known restaurants and
Yeah.
restaurant groups, and sort of having that as sort of like anchoring the food story, and then having one of the Montreal Canadiens' most recognizable faces in the last 15 years as a brand ambassador. Um, how big a chance was that you all took, sort of going and having PK be a part of this? Because he was a big part of the Montreal food scene when I was there.
Yeah, definitely known in many many establishments. Um, Look, I think I'm a Habs fan at heart and a PK fan at heart. So there was obviously I
Must have
would
been
never
fun.
like be like we should work with this person if I didn't also think they were really great for the brand. I think for us being from Quebec, being headquartered and founded in Montreal, and wanting to expand beyond the borders of Quebec, there's always this challenge where language aside, how do we find somebody who could be a porte-parole, who could be an
Yeah,
ambassador, who will not alienate our existing customer base at home, but is also, a known entity
yeah.
outside of Quebec. And I think PK kind of just fit perfectly. He's from Ontario. He played in Montreal. He, had a bit of French,
Yeah.
and we were able to kind of work with him on getting him to be the face of our brand campaign in both languages, and I think people
He'd be
appreciated that.
natural in front of a camera.
He is a natural in front of the camera. English, first take every time.
Yeah,
French took a couple tries, but he was a good sport.
yeah,
And yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting shooting somebody who's media trained
yeah,
and who's on TV
yeah,
every week versus somebody who's a model and normally the most of the content we do if we're going to work with models they're not speaking to camera anyway, but
yeah.
anybody who does need to speak to camera or like even in a a shooting like this, um it's wild how on like he can just turn it on. And same thing, we're working with Morein.
Yeah.
She's like amazing in front of the camera. We always have way more time than we thought, we would need to shoot things with her because she's just like nailing everything first try. But I think it was, look, he's really charismatic. He loves food. He was excited about the idea of like building dishes with our chef. We got on the phone with him, started talking about meal ideas, and that's a really fun part of the
Yeah.
job, collaborating with people. And he started telling stories of food that his mother used to make when he was a kid, and so we were like, just jamming out. And look, I think he was a great ambassador and fun to work with, and he fit that kind of ability to appeal, I think, both to people within Quebec and
Yeah.
and beyond.
And I think there's more good lessons to pull out of that as we think about how obviously like affiliates and influencers, that's an important part of anyone's growth strategy nowadays. But as I bring it back to brand, it sounds like there's an authenticity there in the partnership with PK. Like he wanted to collaborate on the dishes. You obviously created some product with him for him. Um, is that something, was that like an important consideration going into finding an ambassador? Is that something you would recommend that people do? It's not just about someone who's willing to say good things about your product, but someone that's
Yeah.
wants to be a part of the brand building story too. Just like looking for more good advice that you can offer up to others.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one that's it's not always repeatable or replicable. And I think, thinking about Marie-Pierre Morin, she was a customer first.
That's
So
the
like
other
her
part of the story.
authentic like love for the brand and like she eats it every single week. So like we'll get on set with her and she's like, "Oh, by the way, this thing, I loved this dish,
Yeah,
maybe tweak it a little bit." And we're obviously all ears for somebody who has like a lot of kind of like experience interacting with the product itself, feeds it to her family, and is generous with her time and generous with her posting on social and the like. But certainly, even if you don't have that kind of existing customer relationship, I think you need to have an initial conversation and kind of gauge the vibe, see how excited they are. I've definitely done partnerships in the past or big campaigns with people who were more interested in the paycheck than the
yeah,
actual, ambassadorship, let's call it. Um, and again, it's not always the easiest thing to find, but when you find it, it like multiplies what you end up getting out of a relationship like that. Like by a manyfold because of their authentic interest and kind of love for your brand,
right.
especially if they use the product. So it's certainly something as we're continuing to build new partnerships and have new ambassadors that we're looking to replicate as much as we can. And so when you kind of get on the phone with somebody, and especially people love talking about food, so it's a bit of a passion place to start from. But when people are really excited about the idea of building a dish together, I think, it's a good initial sign. And so one of the things to look for, I think, is how excited somebody is in the onset. And um, yeah, it could be a sign of like how willing they're going to be to really deliver,
Yeah.
in the partnership.
I mean, I looked at an awful lot of the content. I mean, I want to say congratulations. It seemed like a genuinely fun thing to do. I can imagine measuring the halo effect that any of those ambassadorships could have on the brand would be difficult, but I would also assume that measuring the performance side of it, like what sort of lift you all saw once you rolled that content out. Is this like an ROI positive initiative for you guys? Like, is it something that you're excited to do again, or this was a good experiment for us, and now we're trying other things. Maybe it's like opening up physical spaces or things
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. Look, I think, like I said earlier, I don't think there's any one silver bullet for brand. I think it definitely had an impact. It wasn't without investment.
Yeah,
We shot this brand campaign with him. We made we made other parts of it, affordable. We shot part of it at my house. We shot some of our employees instead of models. There's ways to kind of like round out the whole thing, but ultimately, it was on broadcast TV, it was on connected TV. We did an out of home campaign with TikTok. They have the out of phone
yeah, I saw that.
program. Did that in Dundas Square in Toronto. Look, it had an impact. We went from aided brand awareness in Ontario of about 1% to 11
Wow.
after, that campaign kind of ran its course. So certain elements of it, yes, for sure. Like all of these things have an impact, but again, like it's we could do that, and then if we don't keep building our brand, we're gonna just go right back down. And so certainly, we're excited. We're working with Sangeeta Patel this year
Cool.
from Entertainment Tonight. She's really excited to be building some dishes with us. So we're gonna go to Toronto and shoot with her in a couple weeks. Those meals are gonna come out in June. Um, so what can I say? Would we do it again? Probably, yeah. You know what I mean? I think it's like every time there's learnings, but we'll shift things, we'll do certain things the same, certain
Yeah,
things a little bit different. That was, our first time doing something like that. We applied those learnings to working with Morein. Now we're taking, even more
yeah.
learnings towards working with Sangeeta. And then I think outside of that, one of the other things that was, I think, really impactful last year was we did a collaborations with Schwartz's.
Mhm.
So iconic
Yeah.
Montreal smoked meat.
Institution.
So smoked meat was already popular, kind of whenever we would put it in dishes on the menu. But to be able to do it with the most recognizable name in smoked meat, I think was obviously something we're really proud of. But what really, really was impactful was an event we did in Toronto where we brought Schwartz's to Toronto for a day. So I think, again, not always the most replicable thing. Because after we did this, I was like, okay, what's the next one going to be?
Yeah.
But if you can take an iconic institution and bring it somewhere where people all know about it, they're the people who, when they visit Montreal, will line up for hours to get one of those sandwiches. We took over a diner. We like put Schwartz's signage out front. We, got the word out in the media before we were there, and there were 500 people lined up
Yeah.
down the street.
That
So
see, these are the things that are really fun. And as I think about the category that you're operating in, bringing it back to those pounding the table to make those brand investments, like having permission to work with the Schwartzes, having permission to get PK Subban excited about creating this content. You're not in the sexiest category out there. You're in a difficult category, and we'll segue to that in just a sec. But I think like I would point to that again as evidence that if you build the brand the right way, you give yourself permission to go out and create these opportunities, and even to think like, what is the next ambitious thing we're going to go and do? Because they've established a brand that people are okay attaching their own personal brand to, where it can become accretive, where it's not just transactional. We can tell those stories together. And these are the things that are difficult to measure sometimes. But if we want to talk about building a durable business, whether it's online or offline, or it's everywhere our customers are, I think these are the things that matter. And more people need to talk about them. Um, I would like to segue it to the categories. You're in the meal delivery, not necessarily meal kit, but meal kit adjacent category, and also subscription. These are two categories that a lot of people have tried and haven't necessarily been successful at. Is that something that you thought of before joining the team? And I'd be just super curious, like what surprised you the most about moving into a category that, I mean, has some challenges? There's a lot of people that have tried before you,
yeah,
haven't necessarily been successful.
yeah. Um, I was really excited about food. I love food.
Cool.
Um, as somebody who came from fashion, I think, and was a musician before then, and whose primary interest is connecting brands to culture. Fashion made a lot of sense. It's already kind of very close to music, to art, to things that I really love. But I think that food is another, look, food has become ascendant as far as like popular culture is concerned. When we're doing the brand research, you know, broad market research, when I joined WeCook and we're looking at like, okay, how are we gonna retool this brand? One stat that popped out that I was, like, completely at first amazed by and then kind of like, "No, I would do the same." It was 60% of millennials would rather attend a food festival than a music festival.
Wow. Never
And
heard that
just, like,
before.
look at, like, I mean, I'm perhaps not everybody's Instagram feed is the same, but, like, mine is, abundant with
Yeah.
food content. And you see, food creators that have grown to have millions of followers, then they get book deals, they're opening restaurants. Like food is exciting, it's fun. It's one of the great pleasures of being a human being. And everybody has to eat.
Yeah.
But you're right, it is a tough category. I was excited about the idea of being able to bring brand into an org that had been really performance and kind of like selling proposition focused. Okay, but what's the value?
Yeah.
What's the value prop? Like, are we really just giving them a meal that's ready in 2 minutes, or are we giving them the magic of mealtime in a way that is much more frictionless? And one of the other things I think people
That's
have
not just a subtle change, by the way. Like, that's very powerful. When I think about what it's gonna take to get a customer to come back or what you're trying to achieve to make subscription work, where I don't have to constantly reacquire you and reacquire you and reacquire you, it's because you have been able to deliver on that promise of magic of mealtime.
totally, and especially within a category that's really been driven by, like, acquisition offers,
Yeah.
deals that, like, run out, and then so, like, the churn is rampant. People
Yeah.
are jumping around from deal to deal, and, um, I probably didn't know or do a ton of research on the, like, marketplace at large before I joined, so that might have come as somewhat of a surprise, but I think that being able to bring this refreshed expression of a brand and have a board and leadership that believe in it and are kind of like, wow, okay, we finally realize like what this is all about and who we are. And it's like it's about enjoyment, ready to eat, made to
Yeah.
enjoy. And like this is who we are, this is who we want to be to our customer, I think has been, a great experience for me. And I think look, brand building has helped open doors to now where, like I said, expanding into retail. Um, Before we built, you know, did work on the brand, would that have been possible? If we were an unknown entity, would people be willing to have us come and, ply our wares and propose products to them? But the chef that we have and the team that we have in terms of ops and our ability to innovate and create new products, I think is really like a big part of that flywheel, right?
Yeah.
And trying to now open new doors. It's been amazing to see like how quickly things that are ideas can become, real products in real life in what I think are very short development cycles. And the logistics of it is like really, really impressive to see, like a federally licensed facility that operates 24/7 and produces like 90,000 meals a week.
Yeah.
It's wild. So it's cool to be able to create new products. The menu changes every week, so we can do these collaborations. We've got a bunch of them coming out this year with some exciting brands. And yeah, it's very different than fashion, but the fundamentals of brand building are the same. And I think we're finding ways to innovate and kind of continue the growth of WeCook despite headwinds in the direct
Yeah.
to consumer like subscription market.
I mean, it sounds like you're doing an awful lot of the things that, like, forget the category, forget the industry for a second, but as if you unpack what a durable company or resilient company or a company that is now iconic has done, they've invested in brand, they have innovated, not for the sake of innovation, but innovation because you want to continue to sort of bring new product to market, and you do that quickly enough that your customers are along the ride with you and that they're really excited. And then I think you'd just be remiss not to mention the logistics side of it, like being able to crack that logistics code, like those ingredients together. It's like sort of this three-dimensional puzzle. Seem like it's really important. Maybe the last thing I wanted to pick your brain on, that fourth dimension, I guess. You create so much content, and the content that I've seen, there's like a real authenticity to it. And when I think back to the earlier days of your career, you talked about like how hard things were. We are learning something that is brand new. We are all learning AI together. And I think through the lens of content creation, it'd be interesting to get your sort of point of view on how do you balance out the using of these tools to create content without losing what it seems like you've developed as like a superpower in like telling authentic stories and creating really great product. Like, how do we make sure that we don't, it's not a race to a bottom and you don't water it down. So yeah, more to unpack there.
Yeah, that is a tough question. Um,
Save the best for last.
yeah, I think there's different types of content that needs to play different roles. And I think what we're kind of realizing, and you mentioned storytelling, like that's really tough to kind of find a substitute for.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to like really start going down that path just yet. Um, we need real stories. We need real people. We want our chef to, get in front of the camera with his team and try some idea that we've come up with of a way of using, for example, the sous vide proteins because they're so, you know, polyvalent. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You can do so many different things with them. There's thousands of possibilities. But for me, I would say more on the like paid side where like static ads, for example, we can iterate and then like try to create again a bit of a flywheel in terms of like implementing learnings and testing different variations. Um, a kind of manual DCO, if you will, like trying to find incrementality there. I think probably for me feels like a use case that's more um, ready today, let's call it. But look, I mean, it's wild what you can now make really quickly. But I think that despite the temptations that many of us are, myself, I'll speak for myself, have had to say, like, try an AI avatar, like,
Yeah.
to replace UGC um, for a talking head ad or what have you. We've just kind of like resisted everything beyond, I would say, like voice for now. Like, I think that's an unlock that I feel like is the technology is there. It's multi-language. We can
Yeah.
get French. We can get English. We no longer necessarily have to hire a voice actor um, for every iteration of an ad. We can, clone our own voices too. And we've been able to find like some efficiency there, and with like subtitling and editing and some of that. But for me, it's really like it's something we're layering on top of real people, real food, real
Yeah.
storytelling. It's hard, even, if we want to do, editing to photos of food, the models, they have a hard time replicating
Yeah.
kind of what really looks real and tasty. So it's definitely something that we're, tiptoeing through, I
Yeah.
would say at this point in time. But I think we want to fight against the idea of volume at this point and really go after quality,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to storytelling. And there's always a desire to chase trends. There's a desire to be topical, be salient, be in front of the customer. But I want us to do it in a way that feels like right and endemic to our brand.
Yeah. I think that's a story that people need to hear more of. That sometimes it feels like if we haven't imbued AI into all of our workflows, we're somehow behind.
Yeah.
But we also, and I think you said it really well, we got to strike this balance of, you're telling real stories with real people, with real food, and you're building a real brand. And so if you can use AI to give the real people within the organization superpowers so they can do more of like create more of those authentic moments, I think you're going to keep building upon the successes that we've seen. And so I think that's probably a great place to wrap us up. I was very excited for this conversation. I love I'm a proud Montrealer when I see other Montrealers being successful, like outside of even the borders of Quebec, doing things the right way, sort of like telling those Montreal stories. It's got a really special place in my heart. So
Thanks.
thank you for being here today, sharing so much wisdom, sharing like your background, which is fascinating. And yeah, I'm cheering you on.
Thanks, man.
Thanks again.
This is great.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.